Our History of Israel study here. This is lesson number 15, as you can see by the board. And I'll take the sign off there. You take your Bibles, if you will, and turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17. We are ready now to deal with the arrival of the fifth course of punishment in God's dealings with Israel. And as you've heard me say a number of times in the study already, the fifth course of punishment is the most important course to understand. You understand from Leviticus chapter 26 in connection with the history of Israel mapped out there in those 5 courses of chastisement or 5 courses of punishment, that the fifth course of punishment is the last course of punishment. There is no 6th course. There is no 7th course. We'll confirm that once again just a little bit here when we go back to Leviticus 26 and get the details of this 5th course of punishment and begin to see the historical arrival of this 5th course upon the nation. But there is no 6th, no 7th course. The 5th course is the final course. And as I've said a number of times, and we'll begin to look at here in this lesson, everything from the time the captivity begins, the Assyrian captivity on the northern kingdom, the Babylonian Chaldean captivity on the southern kingdom, from the time that commences, and the nation therefore is taken out of the land, and the land sits desolate, and that 5th course of punishment gets it underway. From the time that takes place until the kingdom of heaven is established out there, as historically recorded in prophetic vision form by John in the book of the Revelation, everything that in the rest of your Bible from that point on, with the exception of Romans through Philemon, Paul's epistles that deal with us in this dispensation of Gentile grace, when God has suspended his dealings with Israel and temporarily set their program aside, everything, though, with the exception of that, everything pertains to that 5th course of punishment. Everything in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, through Malachi there, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the opening chapters of the book of Acts, and Hebrews through Revelation, everything is dealing with Israel under that 5th course of punishment. Now, there are installments to that 5th course of punishment, but everything still deals with that 5th course of punishment, and the end result of that 5th course is the purging of the nation Israel out there in the day of the Lord's wrath. That's the final installment, the avenging of God's cause with the nation Israel out there in that day of his wrath, and the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, what we commonly call the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, and the establishment of the kingdom. And when the kingdom is established, that's the fulfillment of God's plan and purpose with Israel, as stated back there in the Abrahamic covenant. And in that kingdom, God will have the world repossessed unto himself. He'll have his kingdom established on this earth, and he'll begin to fulfill what his original plan and purpose with man on the earth was, as he stated back to Adam and Eve, back there in the opening 2 chapters of the book of Genesis. And God's ways and God's righteous administration will hold sway on this earth. But everything from this point on now, with the commencement of the 5th course of punishment, everything from this point on is dealing with Israel under it. We're not going to find, like I said, a 6th course or a 7th or whatever there. And because everything pertains to the 5th course, and because of critical times in Israel's dealings, Israel's program, like in the gospel accounts there with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the opening chapter of the book of Acts and so forth, the 5th course is the most important one to understand and appreciate. If Christians understood God's program with Israel like they ought to, if they had the biblical theology that they ought to, seeing things develop from right as the Bible sets them forth and so forth, they wouldn't be having any trouble in the gospel accounts. What I mean by that is they wouldn't think that the dispensation of Gentile grace in which we live today is what's going on back there in the gospel accounts. If Christians understood God's program with Israel, they'd understand the naturalness, for example, of John the Baptist coming on. They'd see that John's beginning to do something that was spoken about in that 5th course of punishment. Spoken about not only in Leviticus 26, but amplified upon by those 5th course of punishment prophets like Isaiah and Malachi and others. Ezekiel, for example, they'd see that John's a prophet in that 5th course of punishment. And by seeing that, they'd realize that Israel's program hasn't been set aside yet. They'd realize that a dispensation of Gentile grace certainly isn't going to be in effect when John the Baptist is there, who's spoken about in Israel's 5th course. They'd understand God's program with Israel is still clearly in effect. If Christians understood from the 5th course of punishment prophets that the days of the Messiah were one of the installments in that fifth course of punishment, they'd understand all that much more that the gospel accounts by no means have to do with this dispensation of Gentile grace. And they understood what Israel's program was all about in the first place, like they ought to. They understand that that gospel of the kingdom isn't talking about how to get to heaven, nor is it talking about a spiritual reigning of God in men's hearts. It's talking about that literal, physical, covenanted kingdom of God on this earth that the Abrahamic covenant and God's program with Israel is all about in the first place. But unfortunately, folks, a biblical theology is not what Christians have. Most Christians just, when they handle the Bible, they just open up in the middle, really not in the middle, they open about 3/4 of the way through it, and they begin reading there. Man, if you did that with anybody else's book, if you took a book by Charles Dickens, for example, David Copperfield, if you were to take that book and would open up 3/4 of the way through and were to start reading about the things David Copperfield was doing there with Mr. Macabre and a girl named Dora and so forth like that, you wouldn't have any comprehension of what's going on there at all. And you'd misunderstand things about David Copperfield. You'd misunderstand things about the people spoken about in those chapters, and because you didn't have the previous information to tell you what's going on at that time. That's really what it's like when Christians don't have that biblical theology they ought to have. And they open the Bible up there in Matthew chapter 1, and they begin reading there, and they expect to comprehend what's going on. And they make misjudgments, and they get a misunderstanding of things. And the biggest misjudgment, the biggest misunderstanding people have is that they think the dispensation of Gentile grace in which we live today is what's going on when the Lord is here upon the earth, in spite of the fact that you've got statements throughout Paul's epistles, statements that confirm the reality of a statement like Romans 15:8 that says, "Now I say that Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God to confirm the promises made unto the fathers." When the Lord was here, he was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, confirming the promises made unto the fathers back here. A statement like that comes along and tells you what the earthly ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ is all about. A ministry to Israel, for Israel, concerning their program, and not a ministry with us Gentiles and pertaining to us Gentiles in this dispensation of grace. Biblical theology gives you that. But that's what Christians lack. Well, hopefully in this brief study, as brief as it is, you're getting a grasp upon the structure of biblical theology. And you get an appreciation for what was going on back there in the book of Genesis and God's and that beginning, that special beginning there in Genesis 12 with the beginning of the nation Israel. And you understand God's plan and purpose of Israel on this earth. And you understand the things that are going on, the outworking of that plan and purpose. And you get an outline, a structure there that you can now go back and start filling in the blanks with. And you got a skeleton more or less there that at least has the bones jointed together for you. And you come along and start putting the meat on there and get a better and better appreciation every more time you read it. Well, we need to get a little further on here now in our examination, and we're coming to the point, like I said, where the arrival of the fifth course of punishment is the issue, and we're going to see once again that that's the issue. That fifth course from the time of the captivity on. The prophets of Isaiah through Malachi are fifth course of punishment prophets. They prophesy about the things that are going to be going on throughout the duration of the fifth course. They give you the installments that they're going to take. They give you the number of installments, and they let you understand what's going to be going on each installment. And they come along and they forecast for you and prophesy for you and tell you in advance all about the gospel accounts and all about the opening chapters of the book of Acts. And all about Hebrews through Revelation, that kingdom up there. The only thing they have no idea about is the ministry of the Apostle Paul and the dispensation of Gentile grace and the things set forth in Romans through Philemon. But they tell you everything else. And that's what we want to begin to see here now. So I had you take your Bibles and turn to 2 Kings chapter 17. You see from the board here, I left everything on the board, everything's cramped, and I told you we're going to get rid of the cramped style now. And now that we're at the beginning of the fifth course, I'm going to remove this diagram, and we're going to use the board underneath. And all we're going to do now is focus on the fifth course. And we're going to kind of say you got all this right here in your notes or in your mind, one or the other or both, hopefully. And we're going to let you deal with that on your own. And we're going to take it now, we're going to take this section of things, and we're going to blow it up and put it on the whole board there, and we're just going to deal with the fifth course and its installments and its scope, therefore. But just one more time here, the book, chapter, and verse references, parameters you got on the board there, I'm telling you, about the first, second, third, and fourth course we've covered already. First course begins in the book of Judges and runs through to the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel. You're under the first course of punishment there of Leviticus 26. Then from 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 12, that glorious interlude of gracious blessing that God gave Israel to magnify the issue concerning the Davidic covenant and the mechanics by which he'll put his Jehovahness and grace into effect for Israel to get us so they can have that kingdom out there. Then the second course of punishment gets itself underway, and its worthiness to come upon the nation is reestablished by Solomon in the latter years of his reign. God restarts the first course of punishment while Solomon's still alive, but tells him the second course won't start until he's dead, and it'll come upon the nation in his son's reign. And therefore, beginning in 1 Kings 12 and right through the end of 1 Kings, the 22nd chapter there, you're dealing with Israel under that second course of punishment. And you got the breaking of the pride of their power, the division of the kingdom there, and you got the judgment on the climate and so forth, and Elijah is the prophet of the second course of punishment. Then the third course of punishment comes upon the nation, beginning in 2 Kings chapter 1 and running through 2 Kings chapter 10 and verse 31. And Elisha is the prophet of the third course, and God prepares to walk contrary unto his people, and he backs Elijah out the very route he came in, and then he comes back in with Elisha, and he begins to bring the judgments of the third course upon the nation. Elijah is that prophet of the third course. And then 2 Kings chapter 10 and verse 32 to 2 Kings chapter 16 and verse 20, or the end of 2 Kings 16, you're dealing with Israel in that fourth course of punishment, and that the third and the fourth course begin to come upon the northern kingdom before it comes upon the southern kingdom, and we've just been following that route. But you can go through and you can see the same things taking place a few years later, so to speak, on the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin with them there. Under the fourth course of punishment, God begins to cut Israel short, begins to do what the fourth course calls for there, and begins to allow invasions to take place into the land. And the open places begin to be taken over by their enemies. And they gather themselves into their walled cities, and they begin to lose territory. And the fourth course of punishment is one step shy, once again, of a conquest of their land by the enemy and the removal of themselves from the land. And that's what the fifth course calls for. And that's what begins to be described for you now as arriving upon both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom in 2 Kings 17 and running all the way through to the end of 2 Kings in chapter 25. So the parameters, therefore, now, the book, chapter, verse parameters of the fifth course of punishment, as far as the flow of the historical account is concerned, is 2 Kings 17 to 2 Kings 25, the end, through 2 Kings 25, I should say, the end of the book in 2 Kings 25. Now, the book of Chronicles, of course, follow the books of the Kings, and the book of Chronicles goes back and chronicles the same history again from the beginning of the interlude of blessing until the commencement of the fifth course of punishment. And it does that for a reason. God's got a reason for going over it again. There are some things that went on behind the scenes, so to speak. There are some things that were in connection with his behind-the-scene dealings that become evident when you go through the Chronicles. And you also see in the Chronicles the issue of the aspect of his Jehovahness. That's that first aspect, his faithfulness to his promises, and that's emphasized there in the Chronicles, and it goes along with, and you see all that, and God's got a reason for going over it again. And it's almost like in the book of the Chronicles, he's coming along and saying, let's go over it again, and let me show you some things that I was doing that weren't evident when you just saw things on the outside. And we're not going to take the time to go over any of those things. I just say that to you so you understand why that second account is there. And that there's more to it than that also, but that's an essential issue to understand. And we haven't followed that line, so to speak, although we really have, but haven't emphasized it. And we've just been going with the historical account as it's been presented as the history. But you go through the history again in the Chronicles, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, from the beginning of the, actually, I say from the beginning of the interlude of blessing, actually the Chronicles take you right back to Adam, and they show you the trace of it all through. But the actual history and the recounting of step one, and then this kind of business, it clicks in there with the interlude of glorious blessing and David coming on the scene. But actually, as the Chronicles, as you see when you start the book of the Chronicles there, you get a genealogy that takes you right back there to Adam. But that's the issue. You're seeing the divine viewpoint of things. You're seeing God working through Israel to fulfill that issue that's spoken about back there in Genesis 1 and 2, and to get the repossession of the earth, and to deal with the adversary, and to fulfill his promise there in Genesis 3:15, to still use man to accomplish his purpose on this earth, and to have man as the ruler and administrator of his righteousness and the establisher of his kingdom on this earth. It's going to be through the agency of the nation Israel now, but the Chronicles make sure that you continue the tie-in on all that. But just note that and appreciate that, and we'll just stick here with Kings as far as the history goes. So the arrival of the fifth course is historically recorded for you in 2 Kings 17 through the end in chapter 25 there. And the parallel would be there in 2 Chronicles about chapter 30 to 36 there, as the parallel account is given there. Now, I had you open up here to 2 Kings 17, and let's have you begin reading here with me the opening few verses. We're just going to note this for now and see the arrival. Then we're going to go back to Leviticus 26, remind ourselves once again of the issue in that fifth course, and see the reality of it taking place here in the account. And then we're going to start dealing with the scope and the understanding we need to have for what's supposed to go on throughout the duration of this fifth course. And from after we get done with looking at the historical arrival here, the focus of our attention will then be on those fifth course of punishment prophets. The prophets God raised up in connection with the arrival and initiation of the fifth course of punishment, and we're going to see the general structure of things that God expected Israel to understand from those fifth course of punishment prophets, and the things he expects us to understand, so that we can map out the scope of the fifth course, and so we can see the installments. And then what we're going to do is quickly survey each installment and get an appreciation for the flow and survey the flow. And we'll see how things have gone in Israel's program up until the time the dispensation of grace came in, and then we'll see the things that are yet to come when that final installment in the fifth course is fulfilled with them in the day of the Lord's wrath. And then a quick look at the establishment of the kingdom, and that'll conclude our short history of the nation of Israel in a short survey study. All right, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. Now, he's the king. Hoshea is there, the king in the northern kingdom, Samaria, upon whom the fifth course arrives, and he's the last one in that line. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him he still did evil, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. But the nation wasn't reformed by the details of the fourth course underneath the previous kings, nor did he come along and acknowledge the fact that Israel's got to get themselves straightened out. Otherwise that fifth course is going to come. He still did the evil. And therefore the reform did not take place. They did not hearken. They continued to walk contrary, as the issue of the fourth course described, and the beginning of the fifth course, Leviticus 26 says, "And if you still walk contrary unto me, and will not hearken unto me by these things, then I'll walk contrary unto you in fury," and that's what's now going to come. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria, and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria. and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. And what you got there in 6 short verses is the simple declaration of the fact that the 5th course of punishment came upon the northern kingdom. When it says there in verse 5 that the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years, and in the 9th year Hoshea, the king of Assyria, took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria. He carried them away captive into Assyria. Now that's what the 5th course calls for. And what you're going to have now from verse 17 and on down through the end of the chapter, verse 41 actually, but especially verse 17 down, probably verse 7 down to verse 23, what you're going to have is a historical recounting of the reason why the 5th course came and the justification for it coming. And what God actually does from verse 7 and down through verse 23 is he kind of quickly goes back and says, look at what prompted all this. Look at what they had gone through, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th course, and there was no reform, there was no hearkening unto me, and they did worse and worse, and they provoked me to anger, and they justified what they received. Also, what you're going to find in this 17th chapter is a statement concerning what to look at, what you're going to have from chapter 18 to 25. And you got a statement in chapter 17 that comes along and says, Judah, the southern kingdom, did the same as Samaria, the northern kingdom. It's just that it came upon them later. And what you're told is that Judah ends up being taken captive also, not by the Assyrians, but you begin reading in chapter 18, everything focuses therefore upon the southern kingdom, and you learn that Judah did do the very same thing. And it was several dozen years later that the 5th course of punishment came upon the southern kingdom, but it came. And so the book of 2 Kings ends with the declaration of the arrival of the 5th course of punishment and the commencement of the 5th course of punishment, both upon the northern kingdom and upon the southern kingdom. You end the book of 2 Kings, and you end the parallel account in 2 Chronicles 36 with the nation as a whole, northern kingdom and southern kingdom, in captivity, and the 5th course fully underway. All right, hold your place here in 2 Kings 17. Come back to Leviticus 26. And even though you're very familiar with the issues in this 5th course of punishment, I just want you to quickly go over with me the full description you have here, and also that issue we took a look at once before when it came to appreciating the overall parameters of the 5 courses of punishment. And just to one more time note the historical markers that are coming along and saying, if you know Leviticus 26, you know what's going on here. We've been noting those historical markers all through the courses. We've been noting the statements within the book of Judges, for example, that match up with Leviticus 26 and verses 16 and 17 there in connection with the 1st course of punishment. We know the historical markers there in the book of 1 Kings 12 through the end of 1 Kings there, matching up with the historical, the matching up with the markers there in verses 18 and 19 there, and verse 20 of Leviticus 26, describing the 2nd course of punishment. And you see the same thing in connection with the 5th course. If you know Leviticus 26, God's made it so you can understand what's going on in the history. And that's what we've been noticing here. Leviticus 26, once again, verse 27. Here's the 5th course of punishment. And if you will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me, then will I walk contrary unto you also in fury. Once again, the 3rd course, he prepares to walk contrary. 4th course, he begins to walk contrary. And the 5th course, he walks contrary to Israel in fury. Walking contrary to them is treating them as if they are not his nation. They still are, but he treats them as if they are not his nation. By the way, folks, you understand that. That helps to appreciate the statement there in Hosea, one of the 5th course of punishment prophets, in which he comes along and pronounces to Israel that they will be not his people. No more mercy, lo ruhama, and then lo ami, not my people. And the reason why he comes along and declares that as the threat of the 5th course of punishment is because in the 5th course of punishment he begins to walk contrary to them in fury, and his soul abhors them as the fullness of the treatment as if they were not his people. See, there's a beautiful example If you understand Leviticus 26, you understand the 5 courses of punishment, you understand the 5th course of punishment in particular, the statements that 5th course of punishment prophet Hosea is making, the statements God has him make, the terminology God uses through him, makes all the sense in the world. It's natural for God to say those things in view of walking contrary to them in fury, like it's sitting back here in Leviticus 26. Well, that's the issue. I will walk contrary to you also in fury, and even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And this is what it will amount to. And you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat. That's the issue once again of when the enemy is besieging the cities, even worse under the 4th course. The starvation and everything, and the capacity of the enemy to inflict Israel will come to the point where they will go to that extreme in connection with being starved out, and the cities being surrounded, being cut off. And I will destroy your high places. Then the breakdown of the walls of the city will take place, and the capital itself, whether it's in the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, Samaria or Jerusalem, will take place. And the enemy will come in like a flood and just spread and break down the walls thereof, and the total destruction and expressions of hatred that the enemy has of them will be exacted upon them. And I'll destroy your high place, and God will use them as the rod of his anger, as the rod of his fury. And it's as if he's with the enemy rather than with Israel. That's the issue, walking contrary to them. And cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. Once again, when God originally said these things to Israel with Moses, before they were entered into the land, they didn't have any cities, they didn't have any sanctuaries and all this, but God knew what they would have once again. He knew the idolatry that they'd engaged themselves in, involved themselves in. He knew how they'd succumb to the policy of evil and consort with the policy of evil and become its greatest proponent when Satan had them as his lawful captive. And they'd have all these things. They'd have all these idols. They'd have all these high places. They'd have all these sanctuaries, plural. And I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I'll bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at. The enemies are going to dwell in it once again. They start dwelling under the 4th course of punishment, but they take possession of it in totality under the 5th course. And I'll scatter you among the heathen. They end up being taken out of the land and scattered amongst the nations. And you see that, and we'll get back to it in 1 Kings there, and verse 5 and verse 6. Pardon me, 2 Kings 17, verse 5 and verse 6. And we'll see when Shalmaneser came in and he carried Israel out of Assyria, it tells you places that he put them and everything. And he sat in that's the beginning of the scattering. And there's going to be more beyond that and everything. And the Babylonian captivity that seizes the southern kingdom spreads them out even further. I'll draw out a sword after you, verse 33, and they're going to have persecution within their captivities. That's why you got things going on like in the book of Esther that go on. And your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. There it is. Captivity and desolation of the land. And they're out of it, and their enemies possess it, and it's going to lie desolate for a certain length of time, as verse 34 goes on. Now, when you begin reading in verse 34 here, as we'll begin doing once again in a few minutes here, you get some information about this 5th course, and you realize that the issue of the captivity and the desolation of the land, so it lies waste, there's a certain length of time associated with that, but that's not all to the 5th course. In fact, what Leviticus 26 comes along and emphasizes is the beginning of the 5th course of punishment. Or the terminology I'm going to use, and that you're going to become familiar with just because I use it, is that what Leviticus 26 sets forth regarding the 5th course of punishment, what it focuses upon is the first installment in that 5th course. There's more to it than that, and that's also evident here in Leviticus 26. But the details here focus upon the first installment. What God does is he leaves it up to prophets that he is going to raise up when the fifth course is threatened and when it actually arrives. And through them, because of the nature of the fifth course, because of what he's going to do in it, because of how important it is, and the fact that it's the last course, and that everything comes to a head eventually in it, he, through those fifth course of punishment prophets, gives the details regarding the fifth course that need to be understood. It's going to be through Isaiah, through Malachi, for example, that you're going to learn and we're going to see the issue of the scope of the fifth course, and realize all that much more, that the captivity and the land enjoying her Sabbaths is only the first installment, and that there's really 4 other installments to it. There's actually 5 installments to the fifth course of punishment. And you see that, you recognize the reality of the capacity for that here in Leviticus 26. And you get the details of it, and the statements regarding it, and the time schedule for the whole thing in those fifth course of punishment prophets. All right, but before we deal with that, let's say some further things about the actual historical arrival of the fifth course, and appreciate some things in 2 Kings 17 to 25, showing its arrival both upon the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom there, and also a couple things in the parallel passage in the end of 2 Chronicles. So hold your place once again, or stick a marker or something like I'm doing here in Leviticus 26. We'll come back there. Come back one more time to 2 Kings 17. And we've read the first 6 verses here already. And you see once again verse 5 and verse 6 declaring the king of Assyria coming up throughout all the land. So that's beyond the fourth course now. When you're under the fourth course and everything, you see Israel begin to be cut short, and the Lord allows certain ones to come into a certain section of the land and kind of take a chunk out and say, and possess that chunk. And then you see that some of that being beaten back in God's mercy and everything like that, and his compassion upon the people. But you didn't have terminology like coming up throughout all the land. But that's what you got now. And the king of Assyria here is the enemy of the fifth course of punishment for the northern kingdom, spoken about back there in Leviticus 26. And he comes throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. And the 9th year Hoshea, once again the king of Assyria, took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and Habor by the river of Gozan and the cities of the Medes. There's a spreading out there, there's a scattering concept taking place there. If you get a map and start looking at those things, everything, you start to see that. And there's some political reasons for that on the part of the king of Syria's part. But he's actually fulfilling what God said was going to take place in connection with beginning to scatter his people. Now, I want you to look at verse 7 and following here with me for a moment. We won't take the time to read everything that you got. I told you it goes all the way down through verse 41 to the end of the chapter. That's a hunk of verses there. And even the verses that focus upon the worthiness of this coming upon the nation, the northern kingdom especially at this time, verses 7 through 23 is too big of a chunk for us to handle right now in this brief survey and everything. I always trust you once again to go over these things that I point out we just haven't got time to deal with yet, but that we're focusing upon. I trust you in connection with the study itself that you're taking the time to do those things so that you enhance your appreciation and connection with what we're looking at in every lesson. But I just want you to notice a few things here. Verse 7 says, "For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God." This was so. This all took place because of what's going to be recorded for you here now in verses 7 and following. And like I said, it's like a historical recounting. It's not that it comes by. It's not that it comes along and goes back and says, "Look at Judges, look at 1 Kings 12, look at 2 Kings 1." It doesn't come along and say that. But by what it says, and you already having read all that before you ever get here, it clicks in your mind with those things. And you appreciate that's what he's giving you, historical recounting here. "For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they had made. And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. And they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. For they served idols, whereof the Lord said unto them, Ye shall not do this thing. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, Turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. Notwithstanding they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the neck of their fathers, that did not believe in the Lord their God. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they followed vanity, and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. I want you to notice verse 17 there, that expression, sold themselves to do evil. There's a time already we've noticed that expression being used in connection with King Ahab in the days of the second course of punishment there with Elijah. And the Lord said there was none like unto Ahab. He had sold himself. He did very abominably, great wickedness. He sold himself to do those things. And now the nation, the northern kingdom, put themselves in that position. And there was no remedy in Ahab's day but to judge him and to bring the next course of punishment. And there was no remedy in Israel's day under the 4th course but to judge them and bring the 5th course of punishment. And that's what you got here. But you got that historical recounting and now coming along saying, and so God removed them. The Lord was angry, very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. And in the last part of verse 18, there was none left but the tribe of Judah only. And then verse 19 says, also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered into the hand of spoilers, until he had cast them out of his sight. And that's that statement I was telling you about that now sits here, even though the focus is upon the northern kingdom, and the historical issue is that the northern kingdom got the 5th course coming upon them and did so first. The statement is made to you here now in chapter 17 that Judah followed the same route, only happened later. And beginning in chapter 18, you start to go down through the arrival of that 5th course of punishment upon the southern kingdom. Now let's take a few moments and look at that, and then we'll get ready to move on here and everything. 5th course comes upon the northern kingdom first, but it does come upon the southern kingdom just like you're told here in that short statement there in verse 18 and in verse 19 and 20. Now, let's back up just for a moment here when it comes to appreciating the 5th course arriving on the southern kingdom, excuse me. Let's back up for a moment and to the point where the 4th course began to arrive upon the southern kingdom. Come on back, if you would, here to chapter 15 in 2 Kings, and look with me, if you would, at verse 36, the last few verses of the chapter. As you go through, once again, you're always being told about the northern kingdom, and you're also being told about the southern kingdom. As you fall, that's from the moment the second course of punishment comes upon the nation, and the breaking of the pride of the power takes place, the division of the kingdom takes place. From that moment on, of course, you're dealing with both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is normally referred to first, then you're told about something going on in the southern kingdom. Reason for that is because the northern kingdom starts receiving the fullness of the second course, and then the arrival of the 3rd course, before the southern kingdom receives the fullness of the second course, and then the arrival of the 3rd course. And the same falls through to the 4th and the 5th course. So the northern kingdom is always referred to first, and then the southern kingdom is referred to, simply because of the historical arrival of the succeeding courses of punishment in their respective ways. But we've been always focusing upon the northern kingdom simply to follow the flow and everything. But while we were back under the under the portion dealing with the fourth course of punishment being upon the northern kingdom, there's a statement at the end of chapter 15 that tells you when the fourth course arrived upon the southern kingdom. Now the fourth course arrived upon the northern kingdom back in verse 32 of chapter 10. God began to cut Israel short. It begins to arrive upon the southern kingdom in its fullness here at the end of chapter 15. Look at verse 36. Now the rest of the acts of Jotham and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In those days the Lord began to send against Judah Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah. And Jotham slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Ahaz his son reigned in his stead. You get a simple statement there. It almost seems like it's a side comment in verse 37, but it's not. It starts the exact same way. Verse 32 in 2 Kings 10 starts. In those days, God did something. Well, in 2 Kings 10:32, the focus upon the northern kingdom. In those days, God began to cut Israel short. Now you get the repeat of that expression pertaining to Judah, the southern kingdom. In those days, the Lord began to send against Judah Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah. He began to send them against him. Send them against him in connection with the fourth course of punishment is the issue, just like the other kings had been sent against the northern kingdom in connection with the fourth course. That simple little statement there, you're paying attention to what's going on, the simple little statement comes along and says, the fourth course is starting now in Judah, in the southern kingdom. Now, while the fourth course is going in the southern kingdom, the fourth course is well underway and progressing on and coming to the point of worthiness for the fifth course in the northern kingdom. And when you get to chapter 17 there in the first 6 verses, you're told it comes, fifth course comes upon the northern kingdom. And then now in chapter 18 of 2 Kings, until the end, everything focuses upon the southern kingdom. And they're under the fourth course already, you know that. And chapter 17 tells you they do evil just like the northern kingdom does. So what you expect to see is the continued downward progression to worthiness of the fifth course in the southern kingdom. And that's what you get from chapter 18 to chapter 25. There are two bright spots in the southern kingdom's history, but they aren't enough to stave off the arrival of the fifth course. The two bright spots are Hezekiah in his reign and Josiah in his reign. But in between is Manasseh, Hezekiah's son. And the horror of his reign puts the nation in the position of no remedy but to receive the fifth course of punishment. Under Josiah that follows is a reprieve, but it's not enough to stave off the fifth course of punishment. Come on down here, if you would, now in 2 Kings to chapter 21, and note the reality of the fifth course being worthy to come in Manasseh's reign. Chapter 21, look at verse 10. And the Lord spake by his servants the prophets, saying, because Manasseh king of Judah hath done these abominations, and hath done wickedly above all that the Amorites did. It's interesting, folks, we talked about the Amorites last time, or the time before, I forget right now, but we talked about them in the last few lessons anyway. And we saw the issue once again concerning the Amorites way back when God saw what Satan was doing in the land of Canaan, and saw what he was doing with that city that later on became Jerusalem. Its father was an Amorite, its mother was a Hittite. And there's a standard, so to speak, of abomination that God always makes with the Amorites. We saw it with Ahab there and so forth. And now you're seeing it again with Manasseh. It's kind of like Manasseh is the Ahab of the southern kingdom. And when he does above all that the Amorites did, which were before him, and has made Judah also sin with his idols. Man, he does above all that the Amorites did. Well, if the Amorites are almost a standard of God's absolute hatred, so that that land has to spew its inhabitants out, when the iniquity of the Amorites come to a full and it vomits them out. Well, if Ahab and his sons in the northern kingdom put the nation quickly in the position of worthiness to come out of that fourth and fifth course of punishment that throws them up out of the land. And Manasseh now does above all that the Amorites did in the southern kingdom. The issue is the fifth course of punishment to vomit them out of the land is ready to arrive. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Behold, I am bringing such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, that whosoever heareth of it, both his ears shall tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, and the plummet of the house of Ahab. See the connection the Lord is making here. The fifth course has already come upon Samaria. I'm going to stretch that line over Judah and Jerusalem, and the plummet of the house of Ahab with that plummet that judges the issue of the Amorite issue and brings the evil because of it is going to be brought upon Judah and Jerusalem now, southern kingdom. And I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. And I will forsake the remnant of mine inheritance, and deliver them into the hand of their enemies. And they shall become a prey and a spoil to all their enemies, because they have done that which was evil in my sight, and have provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came forth out of Egypt, even unto this day. Moreover, Manasseh shed innocent blood very much, till it filled Jerusalem from one end to another, beside his sin wherewith he made Judah to sin in doing that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. There's the statement that the worthiness for the fifth course of punishment is there for coming upon the southern kingdom. And there's a prophetic declaration that's coming by the mouth of his prophets that it's coming. The rest of chapter 21 goes on here and describes the rest of the acts of Manasseh and so forth there, and describes then the things that followed in his stead and so forth. And Josiah comes along in chapter 22, and like I said, there's a bright spot there. Before the fifth course comes, there's a bright spot. And there's an opportunity under Josiah for things to alter and to hold that off a little longer. That's all it does, it holds it off a little longer. And there's other things that connect. I'm just giving you a basic grasp upon a piece of the reality of the situation there. A more detailed study would see some other things, but that's not our purpose right at this present time. Come on down, if you would, here to chapter 23. And look with me at verses 26 and following. Once again, you got the account concerning what Josiah did and everything. And what he did to kind of clean up Israel. And he did that. But you got a very important word that starts off verse 26. After commending Josiah and talking about him in the glowing terms it said, verse 26 says, notwithstanding. That was great and everything, but it didn't stand in the way of what had been said before Josiah came along about Manasseh and what would be the result of Manasseh and his great evil. That line of Samaria would be stretched upon Jerusalem and Judah. The plummet of Ahab would be dropped and utilized against the southern kingdom. And so verse 26 and verse 27 says, notwithstanding, the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his great wrath, wherewith his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations that Manasseh had provoked him withal. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel, and will cast off this city Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. Fifth course is coming upon the southern kingdom there. I want you to notice the expression there in verse 26, the fierceness of his great wrath, wherewith his anger was kindled against Judah. That's the concept, once again, you got there in that fifth course of punishment. He's going to walk contrary to them also in fury. Fury is the fierceness of someone's anger and rage, once again, indignation. And that's the issue here under this fifth course of punishment. The terminology, once again, it's designed to match up and serve as the marker and let you appreciate the fulfillment of Leviticus 26, verses 27 following, the fifth course of punishment here. Well, come to chapter 24, let's take a quick look at the actual arrival of the fifth course. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, Jehoiakim there, In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord, which he had spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. There wasn't going to be any more mercy injected into the fourth course to temper it or anything. The fifth course, and that's the expression you're going to find over there in 2 Chronicles. We'll look at just a moment here, where the expression is, till there was no remedy. Had to have the fifth course come. Well, that's the beginning of the arrival of the fifth course upon the southern kingdom here. You go on down and read the rest of the details of it. There's a number of sieges that Nebuchadnezzar brings upon Jerusalem to produce that desolation and to take the captivity in its fullness out. There's waves of captivity that go out there, and you read about that in the details given to you here, and the parallel of 2 Chronicles. But come on down to chapter 25, last chapter once again for a moment. Come on down, if you would, to, well, it would be great if we could read all the verses here, but we can't. Verse 1, just to set the stage. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, pitched against it, and they built forts against it and round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And then there's the famine once again, no bread for the people. And the city was broken up, verse 4 says. And all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldeans were against the city round about, and the king went the way toward the plain. And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from him. So the king, they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah. And they gave judgment upon him. And he slew the son of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon. And then they burned the house of the Lord there in verse 9, the king's house, and all the house of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. There's the destruction of the temple once again, and all their houses, and all their sanctuaries, their great men and everything, were nothing but perverted idolaters there. And they break down the walls of Jerusalem round about. And they're leaving in a desolation once again, just like in a waste. And the rest of the people that were left in the city and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, verse 11, with the remnant, did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. And he carries away all the issues in the temple of the Lord there and so forth. And that's what you get description of there. And you come on down to verse 21, for example, and this is the summary statement of the conclusion of the whole thing. And the king of Babylon smote them and slew them at Riblah, in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land. And there's the arrival of the fifth course of punishment upon the southern kingdom. Now, we've done this already. I know you know it, but let's just note the marvelousness of the marker once again that confirms the whole thing to you. Lets you understand it and appreciate exactly as God intends you to understand it. You got the passage back in Leviticus 26. Just to take a quick glance at it once again concerning the fact that when this all takes place, verse 34, then shall the land enjoy her Sabbath as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbath as long as it lieth desolate. It shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbath when ye dwelt upon it. And the captivity and taking them out of the land and everything has a goal to it to fulfill that issue, at least fulfill that issue. And what the first installment I'm telling you about right now, what the first installment in this fifth course of punishment does is provide for that. And you have a statement made about that from the divine viewpoint of things in the chronicling account. Come with me very quickly, as we've done in the past, to 2 Chronicles in chapter 36. 2 Chronicles chapter 36. The previous chapters have told you about the northern kingdom going into captivity. The previous chapters have told you how that the southern kingdom did evil, with the exception of Hezekiah and Josiah there, under the fourth course of punishment, and brought the fifth course of punishment upon them there. And you come on down to the expression, for example, in Nebuchadnezzar comes against the city there, and in the beginning of chapter 36, and you come on down to verse 16, and you got the action of Jehoiakim and Zedekiah there, and the end action of that. And they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words. Well, let's back up one more verse there in connection with this. Verse 14, moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. This is the description of the activities once again of the southern kingdom here. And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, and despised his words, and misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, till there was no remedy. And now the fifth curse comes upon that southern kingdom. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with a sword in the house of their sanctuary, had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. They burned the house of God there, break down the walls of Jerusalem, burn the palace with fire, destroy all the goodly vessels in verse 19. And them that had escaped from the sword carried it away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons till the reign of the kingdom of Persia. And this was to fulfill the word of the Lord, verse 21, by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. All right, what it's telling you there once again is that the captivity and desolation of the land was especially to fulfill that first installment of that fifth course of punishment spoken about in Leviticus 26. You didn't have a time factor given to you back there. Jeremiah, a prophet of the fifth course of punishment, raised up and functioning while the invasion was taking place, was given information concerning the time schedule of the first installment, 70 years. Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 29. We'll have opportunity to look at that in the next lesson. But this is the marker once again here. Let's you understand and appreciate that the fifth course is getting itself underway. But now what I want you to come back with me to Leviticus 26 for is to understand once again that this is only the beginning of the fifth course of punishment. When the land has enjoyed her Sabbaths, when the 70 years are fulfilled here, spoken about in verse 21 of 2 Chronicles 36, the fifth course of punishment isn't over. The initial installment is over, but the fifth course itself isn't over. And you see, you recognize the reality of a duration of time, and a lengthy duration of time in Leviticus 26. And when you deal with fifth course of punishment prophets like Jeremiah, in fact, in those very passages, he mentions the 70 years. In Jeremiah 25 and 29, he also makes it clear that that's only the beginning. That let the land enjoy her Sabbaths. That's what the first installment was for. But there's other installments that come. There's a second installment that has a goal to it. There's a third installment that has a goal to it. There's a fourth installment that has a goal to it. And there's a fifth installment that has a goal to it. And that's what we're going to begin to look at in the next lesson. Right now, we got a few minutes left in this lesson. And I just want you to come back, like I said, to Leviticus 26 and note that when you go on beyond here, beyond that description of the arrival of the fifth course, pick it up in verse 36. And upon them that are left alive I will send a faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase them, and they shall flee as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth, and they shall fall one upon another, as it were before a sword when none pursueth. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. You shall perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you, when that takes place, those that are left of you in connection with that shall pine away in their iniquity in their enemies' land. And also in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. You got that pining away and that diminishing concept there and everything. And you got the sense of a length of time. And you got a sense of almost of a generation and a generation following that there. And you get the idea, therefore, that there's a prolongation in connection with this. And when you got that idea and you come over to 2 Chronicles 36 and you see a 70 years for the land to rest and everything, you realize that that's not going to fulfill all this back here. And of course what 2 Chronicles 36 does by mentioning Jeremiah to you is it tells you that what you need to do is to go over at least to Jeremiah and learn what else he said to get a grasp upon that fifth course that's coming now. And what Jeremiah will tell you, as we can see on our next lesson, along with Isaiah and others, Daniel especially, is that that 70 years is only the first installment. The rest of what you got here in Leviticus 26, especially beginning in verse 40, is taking you to something that God's going to prompt and look for under that fifth course of punishment. And when it's prompted and he looks for it and it's responded to by the nation, then the implementation of his Jehovahness and grace for the nation that he covenanted in Deuteronomy 29:30 will begin to come to pass for the nation, and he'll bring them out of that fifth course of punishment and make them into what his purpose calls for, that great nation through which his kingdom will be established on the earth, through which the administration of his righteous rule will transpire on the earth. And the plan of evil of Satan, the adversary, will be demolished, destroyed, and no more be held in remembrance. All right, beginning of the next lesson now, our focus until the end of this study is on the fifth course of punishment, and now we're going to go to those fifth course of punishment prophets and begin to learn the details in connection with the fifth course.